Hello, minders. Welcome back to the Mind Watercolor. We're going to do a little bit of face sketching today. Another one of those things I've been itching to do for a bit. And I've been really enjoying these Hanamulla toned watercolor sketchbooks. This is back to the tan one. This is practice, so just to kind of make that clear, and I'm actually sketching a few different ways. I'm going to show you a couple different ways today. This is what I'm sketching out of. This is Spectrum. It's an illustration annual that comes out every year of all the best fantasy, sci-fi, comic art kind of a thing. I'm going to sketch this Harry Potter rendering here from Robert Carter, illustrator Robert Carter. Just for practice. I don't copy illustrators for my own work, but for practice, I like to find interesting faces, just study the proportions, the structure, the features, shadows, that kind of thing. So this is what I call a little bit more of a traditional sketching process, just using a pencil to sketch it out. This is the most forgiving. You can go in, of course, and erase to your heart's content till you get it right. And that's kind of what I'm doing. The guy up in the upper left corner there, that was a ballpoint pen and wash rendering, and I'm going to have that video as a Sketchbook Peaks video for patrons. So patrons, stay tuned for that. That will be coming. But back to this Harry Potter sketch. When you sketch anything, faces especially, you start with the big shapes, get the proportions right, and then go to the smaller details. However, faces kind of pose an interesting, unique challenge. If you don't study facial structure of the skull and proportions where everything sits on the face, you're gonna fail. It's difficult to do faces well just by sight. In other words, just look at a face, draw it, even if you're good at copy rendering. The reason for that is just it's a very complex. The skull and the way features wrap around the skull is very complex. So a lot of times you'll see me what looks like jumping to details, and actually I'm usually drawing shadow shapes, like shadow shapes of the mouth, under the lip, top lip, shadow shapes of the eyelids, eyebrows. Those all help me position the features on the skull. If you're interested in drawing faces and getting better at faces, it's just a refinement process. Rarely will you make it look right. I mean, there are some people who are just very good because they've practiced a lot, or they're very talented too. But if you're just learning, you're not going to get it right off the bat. You rarely will. There's almost always adjustment. And especially with a face, because proportion is like, you got to nail it. The length of the nose, the position of the eyes and the head, position of the mouth between the chin and the nose, all of those spatial relationships you have to study and you have to practice. So that's what I'm doing today. And I did a lot of refinement with the pencil, although it wasn't all on video, but then as you pick out the shadow shapes, and I'm doing that now with wash, even those make a difference into how those proportions are perceived. Especially mouth. I see mouths, eyes too, drawn very linearly and cartoon-like. And really the trick to drawing great mouths, convincing looking mouths, is to draw the shapes that the shadows make on a mouth. It's actually a revolutionary idea. This is one of those ideas that once it kind of clicks in your mind, you go, oh man, that's it, rather than draw the shape of a mouth. There's not a lot of linear shapes. There are a few on a mouth. It's also true of eyes and nose, but I think especially the mouth. The mouth kind of sits in a wraparound part of the face, and that's another part that is often done wrong. They're rendered flat across the front of the face. So there's two things you really need to study when you're studying facial proportions. That's the skull structure. You need to be able to see that, even if you don't draw it. You need to be able to see it through the face, where the cheekbones lie, where the chin, where the ridge of the nose stops, the brow ridge, things like that. And see that skull structure through the rendering that you're doing. Then the soft, fleshy tissue masses and muscle masses and how they sit and attach. I'm actually not trying to do a likeness. I'm just trying to get the structure correct. So I'm not trying to make it look like his. I'm just using his guide in terms of the angle and clues and reminders of the proportion. But I just want, when I finish, I just want a proper structure, correct structure, something that is convincing. And then I just finish up with some highlights. And that's the great thing about toned paper. You can add a few gouache highlights, and that sort of rounds out your form. Well, I'm going to move on to this one, and I'll just let you know ahead of time. This one gave me a little trouble. It's facing the same way, but we're looking more upward at her face instead of downward like we were with the Harry Potter one. And I'm going to sketch a different way. This way is more challenging. It's starting out. I'm using a water brush because I'm using very watered down paint. It's a very similar process to sketching with a very light marker. And you're almost sculpting out the face. Can't erase when you do this, but you can revise, and that's why all of the lines are kept and forms are kept very, very light. But I find it a very fun way to sketch, and I just like to challenge myself every now and then that way. And you just start diagramming out those proportions. And you make your paint a little darker and a little more specific as to where little bits of contrast and more linear aspects are as you go. As you're more confident of getting those proportions right, then you start defining them. I had trouble though with the eyes on this one, and I could see kind of had a tilt to her head, tilt back to her head that wasn't in the original. That's really not a problem, in that as long as I was getting a correct structure that looked like a correct structure, I should have been happy. But I started trying to cheat that right eye, our right, her left, upwards, and it kind of screwed the whole thing up. So all the way to the end of this sketch, I was kind of cheating the eyes to kind of bring them back into alignment with the rest of the face. By cheating, that just means, putting lines and shadows in places that kind of make it look like they're coming back in line. And eye lines, I mentioned the mouth, eye lines are very important. You've got to understand where the skull sockets are, how the brow ridges sit on the top of those, how everything lines up. So, again, it's more than just copying a subject that you're looking at. Some people can do that without studying skull structure and facial proportions, but not many. I certainly couldn't. And you verify things. I mean, there are ways of drawing to verify proportions and where things are, how big something is, where something lies in relationship to another. But there are also ways you can verify that just by knowing the proportions of the skull. So when you're copying something, you say, well, that doesn't look right. Well, how does that compare to what I know about a skull structure? So you can see I'm just continuing to darken these features, these shadow areas as I put them in. And you'll see I really spend a lot of time tweaking these eyes, trying to make the eyes come into alignment correctly. You're seeing all of these sketches compressed a little bit because of my camera angle. At the end, you'll see it more flat on. I'll take a short video at the end of the finished piece, but all of the proportions are compacted from right to left a little. because I have a camera angle that's coming from the left, not looking flat. It's funny because that doesn't make a lot of difference in most of the videos I make, but it seems to show in portraits. Still, I think you can get the idea by watching. So again, refining the eyes. I think I've got them sitting properly now, at least a reasonably convincing alignment and proportion. So I'm just going in and refining everything, just gradually making the paint darker. And you're going to see in a few minutes that I do the opposite of what I did with the face in the upper left. I'm going to refine some of the details with a ballpoint pen on top of the wash. So it's sort of a reverse line and wash, if you will. Wash and line. But, this is really the last step other than highlighting. Once you get those proportions right, or at least to your satisfaction, is just to go in and define the areas that you need to define. Ballpoint pen is one great way to do it. You could do it lots of ways. You could do it with colored pencil. You could do it with water-soluble graphite. I mean, there's so many ways to sketch. But I wanted to do it with ballpoint pen, and I think it's working out fine. Really, again, I didn't get a likeness compared to the illustrators, but just practicing proper proportions and structure. You tell yourself when you do these what you're learning for next time. Figure out what it is that you learned off of doing it. If you don't, there's not much purpose in doing it. If you're just trying to make pretty pictures in your sketchbook, you're kind of wasting an opportunity. That's a great byproduct. I mean, if you do a good job, but you really want to know or tell yourself what you learned. On this, it was eyes, difficulty with the eyes, and I learned several things while I was doing it, or reinforced some things that I already knew. I'm kind of rusty at this. I actually haven't done a lot of facial practice in a while. So it was just good. It was good to get it out. Remind me of some of those things. It's like, oh yeah, you need to do this. Oh yeah, if I don't wrap the eye line straight around this way, it doesn't line up with the mouth, blah, blah, blah. It's not going to look right. Those kind of things, you're reminding yourself. And you can see down there on the chin line, I changed the line of the jaw, and you can, this is kind of messy. It's not real refined sketching. You can kind of use some gouache to correct. The important part is seeing what's wrong and knowing how to correct it. And if you don't try it, say, all right, that jaw would look better if it was going this way. You don't try it, you don't verify that was a problem. So here's the finished part, and I did do some refinement after the video stopped. Always do. But reasonably happy considering the problems I was having with the eyes to begin with. And again, patrons, look for that video in the upper left. Thank you everybody for watching. Hope you enjoyed that. Thank you patrons for your support. We'll see everybody in the next video. Bye-bye.